sun shines brightly through the slits of the US 301 overpass over the Tropicana Yard in Bradenton, Florida on the dawn of National Train Day. Welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. Saturday, May 13th, 2023 would be this year's National Train Day. And as a result of such, who could have imagined I'd be out trackside? I kind of had a rough plan laid out for this day, which was to sort of document a new practice that CSX has actually reinstated involving this train, and to possibly see a few others along the way. The day would begin with CSX locomotive number 7265 working as power for train L775, the Tropicana Yard switcher, building out today's outbound Tropicana juice train, quote unquote, and that is the train that we'd follow northward today. So our journey would begin just to the northwest at the 13th Avenue road crossing. In the foreground is both the giant road crossing where US 301 and 41 converge and the motive power for L713. That is the local identification for the train that runs back and forth between Tampa, Bradenton, and back to Tampa. They are halfway through that journey now, picking up the loaded cars that L775 had just put together down at the yard, as well as some other miscellaneous things that were set to come north from Bradenton. So they would call the Alafaya River Bridge tender just before noon to get the Big Manatee River down and locked, and that would be their key to leave Bradenton. In total, 14 reefers will be leaving Tropicana's Bradenton facility today, along with some other miscellaneous things such as empty rock hoppers from Palmetto and some other miscellaneous freight from Sarasota and Bradenton Industries. Though this manifest freight section is likely a tad amplified because ever since Hurricane Ian ravaged West Florida's southern counties back in September, the Seminole Gulf Short Line Railroad has had many challenges to face ever since. Their main freight line from Arcadia to Fort Myers suffered terrible damage after the storm, including the loss of many water crossings and their most vital one, the bridge over the Caloosahatchee River, meaning the most southern part of their rail line is now landlocked until they're able to repair the bridge. Up until fairly recently, when they were able to get some of their smaller water crossings repaired, allowing rail access to just before the Caloosahatchee River, all of the freight traffic bound for Fort Myers had to be redirected to their Sarasota branch, which meant coming through Bradenton and sending it all to Sarasota. It would then be transloaded by truck from Sarasota to Fort Myers. Although the rail access has been restored up until a point just south of Punta Gorda, it's likely that a handful of these commodities are still being transloaded from Sarasota, and so the manifest bit coming out of Bradenton here is probably on the higher end still. Coming through Ruskin, across the Little Manatee River, the juice train continues its northward journey up the Palmetto subdivision for Tampa and Yeoman Yard. This L700 local job is all that's left of the once mighty Tropicana juice train that ran straight from Bradenton to Kearney, New Jersey. Florida's orange juice used to move as its own train out to Jacksonville or New Jersey up until 2017 when precision scheduled railroading kicked in and they changed all their practices, although we will be stepping a little bit back in time today once we get to Tampa. Though continuing our journey north coming into Gibsonton, I'd hear a few radio callouts that would change my mind on my next filming location. Instead of stopping somewhere else along the way to see L700 again, I would instead head all the way to Tampa and head out east a ways to shoot Amtrak 91.
Hey, do you have Amtrak PO 91 versus track 1 over?
PO 91, 12, go ahead over.
Roger, my number is 96863, 96863, 390, PO 91, 12 into Amtrak, 161 employee Carter. Release 930 on iTrap from the milepost A81.7 to the NAS, and over.
Amtrak 91 is the daily Silver Star passenger service from New York City to Miami, Florida, and today they would have P42 DC number 161 in the lead. Following the retirement of Amtrak locomotive number 156, Amtrak's 50th anniversary celebration made the number 161 the new Phase 1 paint scheme heritage engine. The Phase 1 paint design was Amtrak's first ever paint scheme, first introduced in 1972. And following Amtrak's 50th anniversary in 2021, a few locomotives were repainted to commemorate their legacy, including this one after the 156 was originally retired. The outbound Silver Star quite literally snuck up on me here, and I hardly had time to get ready for it.
And before I could even change the camera angle, holy, he's gone and the signal is dark. They have got places to be today.
After 91, we'd head back down to Yeoman Yard because L700 was now nearing Tampa Bay. And setting up just around the corner from TS Crossing, the Juice Train's 2 GE locomotives would appear from around the corner, exiting the Tampa Terminal subdivision, coming into Yeoman, picking up some orders from the yardmaster as they enter the yard.
700.
Permission that nobody talked to. Pull down the old main. Take those 8 jerseys to the transfer. Bring the engines back, couple up. I'll tell you what to do with the rest.
I saw moving down the old main, put the jerseys on transfer, a couple of times.
We'll go into the old main. You can change leads once he's clear.
So, as per the yardmaster's orders, L700 was to drop the 8 New Jersey-bound juice cars on the Yeoman transfer, while taking the rest of the consist down to the easternmost point of Yeoman and putting it into the freight yard. Now, why exactly are they breaking the train up, and what is the transfer? They're breaking the train up because, as of sometime in April 2023, Tropicana Juice is now back on the Tampa-bound intermodal trains. And we're stepping back in time a bit here because once the original unit juice train was terminated, the juice would go on the intermodals for quite some time before it was deviated to freight trains only. Now, for the New Jersey-bound cars, they're able to leave Tampa on the nightly IO44 intermodal train to Jacksonville, and from there they'll go on train IO32 to North Bergen, New Jersey. However, only 8 of the 14 reefers that we've brought up from Bradenton today are set to go to New Jersey, so only those 8 will head to the Yeoman transfer, which I'll discuss in a moment. The rest of the train, the remaining 4 reefer cars and the miscellaneous freight, must go into the yard at Yeoman, because that stuff still has to go on the nightly M442 mixed freight train for Waycross, Georgia. It's more than likely that those remaining 4 reefers are bound for Cincinnati, Ohio, as they'll take the mixed freight to Waycross, and from Waycross to Cincinnati they'll run on train M542, which runs over the KD subdivision, which we just recently visited last winter. With the rest of the train going into Yeoman, they would also put the motive power for L700 in the yard as well, because those 2 locomotives will not be pulling IO44 tonight. I'm not sure why they do it this way, but the 3 GE locomotives that are sitting right in front of us here are actually the power set to pull IO44. These 3 locomotives had just arrived this morning on train M441, the sister train to 442, Waycross to Tampa mixed freight. But instead of turning the locomotives and setting them back on M442, they head out early on IO44. And so the intermodal and mixed freight trains' power tends to swap on a daily basis once they get to Tampa, and again, I can't tell you why. But we wouldn't be following that freight portion because those 8 New Jersey-bound reefers is what we are interested in, and they're heading up to the Yeoman transfer, which is right up here. By the time I had gotten up around to 6th Avenue, the locomotives had already taken off from the juice cars and were heading back over to take the rest of the train to Yeoman, but we can clearly see our 8 Tropicana reefers sitting in the foreground awaiting the IO-44 power set to come up and begin building the train later this evening. The Yeoman transfer is the single track that runs laterally between Yeoman Yard and Uceda Yard, which is the intermodal-based facility. Yeoman was the former Seaboard Yard and Uceda was the former Atlantic Coastline Yard. But under CSX, it's all on the same property, but Yeoman handles the freight section and Uceda is now the intermodal facility. And this aerial drone footage gives you a bit of an idea of what our train's going to look like tonight when it departs. The consist or train itself has already been for the most part put together. It's now just a process of loading the containers and trailers that are set to make this train out this evening. And that's a process that would ultimately take all day up until the train's departure. And although there's been some hints over the years that UPS and container traffic to this Uceda terminal has been diminishing over the years, there's still enough left to warrant a train in and out of here every night. Though I'd only be able to have the drone up in the air for so long because at some point I remembered what day it was. National Train Day. And this year, after 3 years of its absence, Tampa Union Station would be putting on their annual National Train Day event. And so, since the clock was already about to strike 2 in the afternoon, we figured we should get some time in over there, so that's where we turn the wheel next.
Some starry night, when her kisses make you tingle, she'll hold you tight.
The 1912 built stub end terminal, Tampa Union Station, normally only hosting 2 daily Amtrak trains, would today be hosting an entire community of history and rail enthusiasts. Nearly the entirety of the station's interior has been decked out with historical stands and display cases, artifacts and photographs of the Atlantic Coastline and Seaboard Airline railroads that used to dominate this territory, historical photographs and blueprints from the City of Tampa Architectural Review and Historic Preservation, Operation Lifesaver promotionals, and even the Atlantic Coastline and Seaboard Airline Railroads Historical Society would have a stake and advertisement at this station. And even my pals Grayson and Dave were out here at the station to promote and advertise our Florida Railroad Museum and Parish. Our own flyers and historical maps would be in no shortage at today's display. Taking the show outside, we have a few food trucks available, as well as a very talented singer who was singing songs from the 40s all the way through the 80s. At least, that's what my grandmother would tell me afterwards, because I would have no clue what songs he was singing. And so, call me uncultured if you must. Perhaps it was due to me being occupied in a separate room that had a plethora of model train displays set up and running around the entire room. Under the makeshift roof was every scale, G to HO to Lego. The Lego display in particular really stood out and impressed me because as somebody who used to play with Legos when I was younger, it occurred to me that somebody had to painstakingly place every single one of these bricks to create this scene. Just the thought of how long it would take to make this display piece by piece, even with a blueprint, is really what impressed me. But by far, what I found to be one of the coolest trains running under this roof was this Amtrak Surfliner fleet set, on the largest triple-track display in the center of the room. And on the G-scale layout, I was also taken aback by this model of a Conrail SD45. Such model had a full cab interior along with full body and walkway lighting as well as class lights on the rear. If it wasn't for the fact that there were other real trains running around in Central Florida, I'd have probably stuck around in this room all day because there was no shortage of action in here and the stuff that they had running in here was very impressive. The folks that were in charge of running these trains were also very knowledgeable, and I had a few great conversations with some of them. And so, in the off chance that any of them see this video, I had a great time talking with you guys and it was great meeting you again. However, nonetheless, our daydreaming and reminiscing would have to be cut short in about an hour because, like I said, there are other real trains running around in Central Florida, and one of them that we heard about earlier this morning was nearing our area. So we'd walk out the front gates of Tampa Union Station to be greeted by some brewing storm clouds that were only to get larger as the day progressed and we turned eastward. Turned eastward towards Plant City, Florida. I figured I'd find a spot in Plant City to see this train we heard about coming south, but then I realized on the way over that some other people may have also realized it's National Train Day and might want to see some stuff out here too. And wow, I was right. Everybody and their parents knew it was National Train Day today because the Plant City train viewing platform was packed. Though, contrary to popular belief, that's not all that bad of a thing. It gave me the opportunity to reconnect with some old friends that I hadn't talked with in quite a while. And frankly, I can't lie when I say we all had a great time out here. But the rain must have also known it was National Train Day today because those storm clouds from Tampa had gotten larger and larger and were getting heavier and heavier, and the rain was starting to fall. Though with this rain would come a train.
Team CSX 7008. Stop on the line 822.7. Southbound out.
Train M453 has come to a stop just north of the Diamonds at the signals called Sandler Junction. 453 has come south into Plant City with the intention of turning to the east. But before they're able to do that, they have to stop at Sandler Junction and wait on the opposing Amtrak 92, coming up from Miami, now running west for Tampa Union Station. With their typical Silver Star consist in tow, Amtrak 92 is the second daily Amtrak train that Tampa Union Station will see, running northbound from Miami to New York City, in opposition to Amtrak 91.
92, engine 157, solid clear, north end of Cherry.
But all the Amtraks aside, including that 92, M453 can now make their eastward move towards Lakeland, and the rain had turned to a steady drizzle by the time they began their length into the curve. With a fairly recently rebuilt CM44 locomotive at the head of this train, M453 is a daily manifest freight train from Waycross, Georgia bound for Miami, Florida, though they will commonly make pickups and/or drop-offs at Baldwin and Winston yards along the way there. And today's iteration of 453 is now on the second portion of their journey from Baldwin to Winston. And since Winston Yard is located just outside of Lakeland, they're turning east here at Plant City to head over there. Though this is a bit of a deviation from the route that they will often take to go to Winston, once they come down the S-line from Baldwin, once they reach Vitus Junction at Richland, Florida, they have two options, either turning to the southwest or turning to the southeast. They'll often go to the southeast, using what's known as the Vitus subdivision to run down into Lakeland and then turn west into Winston Yard that way. But on an occasion that seems to be increasing recently, they'll instead turn to the southwest at Vitus, using the Yeoman subdivision to run down here to Plant City, and then using the connection here to turn to the east and run to Winston Yard that way. Regardless of what route they take to Winston, they'll work the yard there before continuing to the east towards Auburndale and then turning south, running all the way to Miami. But today's deviation in routing gave Plant City an extra train to add to its count for National Train Day. With two locomotives on power for this train, the second locomotive would be situated in the center of the train as a distributed power locomotive. And while including some very interesting rolling stock, 453 would have the general commodities bound for Winston, Baldwin, and the Miami areas. Such would also include a handful of auto racks on the bottom of the train with some brand new automobiles bound for the Automotive Distribution Center in West Palm Beach. But once the final auto carrier of 453 got over the Sandler Junction crossovers and this sharp curve, everybody would then get ready and change their positions as the train of the day was on its way south. At least it's what I presume to have been the train of the day, given what else was running today, and with how much talk of this train came amongst the groups of rail fans before its arrival as opposed to every other train. As the rain had kind of lightened up and backed off for now, everybody would take this time to stake out their perfect spots for this southbound train. This train would ultimately be about 15 minutes behind 453's clearance, but in opposition to 453, they would not be turning east at Plant City, they'd be coming straight south across the Diamonds. The foreign-powered tank train would be a B631, southbound ethanol loads for Tampa from Chicago, Illinois. These ethanol unit trains often originate in Iowa on the Canadian Pacific, now Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway, before transferring over to CSX trackage at Chicago and running the rest of the way to Tampa with CSX crews, but often while retaining whatever power was originally on the train when it left Iowa, meaning that foreign power can often be found on these trains. Once the train reaches Tampa, it'll eventually get transferred to the port of Tampa, where they have a gasoline terminal that will mix the ethanol with gasoline. That's why at gas stations you'll see stickers that notify you of the ethanol content in your gas. But in the Chicago to Tampa stage, it is often a nice draw for rail fans across the United States, especially when these or other ethanol trains like to run with transferred foreign power. Everybody seemed to be pretty satisfied with their shots of this B631 after it passed, but since it seemed to have been the train of the day, some people after reviewing their shots called it a day right after. Though that would only be a handful of people, and the majority of us would stick around afterward, and the rain seemed to be one of those people, just sticking off the horizon, making up its mind as to whether it wanted to rain again or not, but sticking around just in case it wanted to. And although there weren't any immediate signs it was going to start again, it would eventually start to get darker and darker as per earlier this afternoon. And as we stuck around waiting, the northbound Amtrak 92, now finished with their Tampa Union Station stop, would eventually come out of that storm headed back east. I guess the rain would finally make up its mind. It did want to rain again, and a lot. This was the most it had rained all day today, and all in anticipation for our final train of the day. Everybody would have to find their positions under the platform, not so much in anticipation for the train, but just to get out of the rain and stay dry as best they could. It was a full-on thunderstorm in Plant City waiting on this final one, and it was the one that we had been technically following since the very beginning. Now having put together the train over in Uceda Yard with the 3 GE locomotives from Yeoman, the 8 New Jersey-bound Tropicana reefers from the transfer track, and all of the intermodal container sections that were being loaded in Uceda, it is now all heading north as one train, IO44, bound for Jacksonville. Within the same minute, the rear end of IO44 would clear the Plant City holdout at the top of the hill to the east, and that would pretty much end all the action here in Plant City for the daylight time of National Train Day. And that would pretty much end it for me and just about everybody else here. I'd stick around and wait for a little bit longer, but before I knew it, within 15 minutes, just about everyone had left. We were just about the only ones left after a short time on the platform at the end of the day. And for me at least, this would ultimately mark the end of this year's National Train Day. And for me, I can say that it certainly went well. And the parking lot, while minutes ago having been full of rail fans, is now still quite full, though now only down to bingo players. As of now, we'd have to bid farewell to this year's National Train Day under some gray skies. Skies that may not have had water falling from them anymore, but still did further to the west. And that's exactly where we'd have to go to make our way home. And even though we'd stick around cleaning up for a bit afterwards, we'd ultimately bite the bullet and eventually head off into the storms. And although the end of this outing was fairly cloudy and dark, maybe next time the sun will be out. The next time that I see y'all around on the Sunshine State Rails.